EIWO webinar on employers hiring of older workers and aging policies. And we're happy to have 3 guests, but 4 presentations. So we start with a research presentation by Gülin Öylü, internally from the EIWO program. And then we are happy to have 3 guests on policy perspective, which is Loriato from Age Platform Europe, Mike Mansfield from ProAge, and Araskog from Arbetsgivarverket. So which is a Swedish agency, difficult word, for government employers, if I correctly translate. It's not a direct translation, but at least that's the official title. And we will all have time for 10 to 15 minutes for input, for more or less impulses for discussion, and there is time for discussion at the end. I hope we can keep this. We don't have to stop at 3:30 exactly, but so if there's a need to continue, we can always do this. And I simply hand over to Gülin simply to start. Welcome everybody again, and I look forward to having a nice series of presentations and also a nice discussion.
Thank you, Andreas. Hi everyone. I'm sharing my screen now. As Andreas mentioned, this is these are the results from the part of the EIWO project, and also it's part of my PhD work I recently completed. And this study is on older workers hiring chances in different establishments with different employee structures, sectors, and local labor context. I would like to start with a brief background. As we all know here, the number of older workers increases in the labor market and participation increases, but still we see inequalities and lower employment chances, especially in terms of leading to precarious work, low income and employment security. And this is much more prevalent for women, lower educated, low skilled, blue collar workers and migrants. And this is part of the mechanism for this is lower re-employment rates of older workers in companies. And this is usually explained by employing but not hiring pattern by employers, because although employers want to retain older employees, they are very unlikely to hire new older workers. And this is explained by various factors. For example, one could be age discrimination in hiring, but also could be on the job training investments that employers doesn't want to give up and retain older workers, but also don't like to invest in new older workers. It could be also higher wage and wage rigidities in the labor market for older workers, and high protection of terminating contracts, so employers doesn't want to hire, or mandatory retirement ages. We actually find in previous study than this study, this link between age and re-employment chances. And we, using Swedish registry data in Sweden, we look at age groups 50 and 63 in 2016 and 2018. And we follow their unemployment risk, re-employment chances and outcomes. Actually, older workers have very different unemployment risks, and we control for age. But when we look at their re-employment chances once they are unemployed, older workers, especially after starting from 57, they have significantly lower chances. And when they are reemployed with lower salaries than their previous employers. And also they are part-time unemployed, which is another type of unemployment in Sweden, where people who are employed can apply if they have less time or duration of contract than they want to have. And these part-time unemployed older workers are more likely to be in health, education, and transport storage sectors. And I would like to emphasize these sectors because these sectors will come up when we talk about hiring chances in the current study. So we discussed the older workers have limited re-employment opportunities, but in this study, we are actually looking at if this is the case for all employers, or if some type of employers in different sectors or local labor markets have different behavior in terms of hiring older workers, and we can identify what are those type of employers. So in this study, we look at 3 different dimensions: age, gender, age and education, skills structure, composition, sectors, and local labor market conditions. Again, we use Swedish national registers, so this is a representative study for Sweden, and we use all establishments, we can also call workplaces, with at least 10 employees, and these are connected to bigger enterprises. Also, for the outcome, we looked at likelihood of these all establishments hiring at least 1 or more older workers. And as a control variables, as I mentioned, we looked at composition of age, share of older workers, share of primary educated, share of higher educated in the establishment. These are to also proxy for the skill structure of the companies. We also use sectors, and we look at unemployment rate, share of unfilled positions in different municipalities or local regions in Sweden. So I will start the results. Here we see in the right the share of likelihood of hiring older workers with respect to share of older workers in the company, primary educated and higher educated employees. And here is the biggest steeper line is with the share of older workers in the company. So if the company has more older workers, they tend to hire more older workers again. And the second steeper line is the share of primary educated employees in the company, so which also correlate with the share of low paid and maybe manual employment in these companies, and they are also more likely to hire older workers. And also we looked at sectors. So here you can see the sectors that have with different chances of hiring older workers, and the highest probability is that in the sector of education, health, transport, storage, and the public administration sectors. And I mark 3 sectors with red: health, education, and transport and storage sectors, which were the sectors that we find actually the part-time unemployment more in the previous study. But also we can see the trend with public sectors are more likely to hire older workers, and the sectors in services, they are less likely to hire older workers, and also IT sector have the lowest likelihood of hiring older workers. And here we looked at different local labor market characteristics in each municipalities. So we looked at 3 different dimensions: ratio of older workers, unemployment rate, and ratio of unfilled positions. Literature actually shows that if there are labor shortages in the labor market, companies tend to hire more older workers, but the results are surprisingly wasn't in line with this previously results. Unemployment rate and ratio of unfilled positions have the opposite direction in terms of labor shortages and higher hiring chances of older workers. These effects aren't as strong as the ratio of older workers, but if there is slight increase in unemployment rate, all companies actually hire more older workers. And this is the opposite for ratio of positions that are not fulfilled. But as we see, it's also very structured by the demographic structure of the local regions, because the ratio of older workers in the local region is correlated highly with the hiring chances of the older workers. So overall, we have 3 different summaries for in terms of share of employee composition, sectors, and local labor market. But today, while looking at the summary of results, I would like to underline the question if the results that we find in terms of higher hiring chances of older workers in different sectors and employer types, is this good or bad? Because it's actually could mean benefits for older workers in terms of older workers are hired in for example, public sectors or transport service sector, but also it could mean they are hired in the sector which they can be hired with lower paid or lower skilled occupations or more precarious employment types. And I can talk about each different type of results one by one. For example, when we look at the higher chances of older workers in companies with higher share of older workers, this could mean actually the less ageism in the companies with more older workers, but also it could mean the old and young workers segregation in different sectors and different employers. So we still need to dig into that more. And also when we look at healthcare, education and transport service sectors, they are more likely to hire new older workers. But also in previous study, we see they are usually hired with more part-time unemployment and lower salaries. So that means even though they have higher chances of being hired, they're still more likely to be precarious. And it also needs to be analyzed further if this is actually the reason that they have higher hiring chances, or this labor demand in employers only can turn into for older worker employment in the case of precarious employment. And finally, we see surprising results in terms of the opposite direction of labor demand and hiring chances of older workers. And this could mean skill mismatch, but also could mean, again, structural differences between regions and segregation in terms of older workers' labor supply. So these are overall results from the study, and it actually lead to more discussion and research questions that we will further analyze in terms of the role of time perspective, because this study is only the recent year and it's cross-sectional. So we need to look at the time perspective in terms of demands, and we need to look at the differences in different sectors. For example, the contract type and flexibility to really see the mechanisms why older workers hired in different sectors and why they're not hired in others. So that's all from me, but we can discuss more at the end of the webinar.
Yeah, thanks, Gülin, and thanks for the results. And of course, it's part of the EIWO perspectives, looking at Sweden and looking at employers, at workers' trajectories or workers' experience in hiring mostly. Of course, in other parts of the program, we look at the employer side, at the branch side, and the policy perspectives. But it would be good also to discuss this from a more international perspective here with our guests. And I look forward to the presentations now. By I think next one is Sarah Loriato, and well, we will see, and then we have a discussion afterwards. Sarah.
Hi everyone. Hi. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I don't know, Gülin, if you could. Oh yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot for your support during this and sharing the slides. You can already go to the next slide, please. I'll start by just letting you know for who I work for. So I work for Age Europe platform, which is a platform gathering organization all over Europe. Those organizations are composed of all the people or represent all the people in member states. And we work on several kind of topics, from health to age-friendly environments to also employment. I'm actually in charge of FIE's linked to employment, and our aim is really to bring the voice of all the people, and for me, all the workers in policy debates, and make sure that all the people's interests and older workers' interest is not forgotten. So we work with our members for that goal. Next slide, please. Yeah, so 2 years ago, we had a discussion with our members. So we are kind of organized in task forces, and some members are really specialized in the place of aging in the labor markets. And so we had a look on the tendency at EU level on the labor markets, namely the narrative today that is about demographic changes, fewer younger people on the labor market, the urgent need of older people to stay on the labor market, and pushing back the age of retirement in some countries. All of this coupled with the fact that there are now labor shortages in some sectors. So we discussed a lot about that topic, and we came to the fact that when you look at Eurostat and the statistics at EU level, we see that already 2/5 of persons aged between 55 and 64 in Europe do not work. So without even thinking about people working longer, what do we do with people today who are older than other workers, but do not have work, mainly because of their age? So let's have a look on the next slide, please. I won't repeat what Gülin says here, but basically when we try to explain the figures found on Eurostat, it was mainly linked to what we discussed for many years with our members. It was mainly due because of ageism on the labor market, in the recruitment as well, of course. It was due, of course, to the lack of support in the labor market, talking about the policies that are supposed to support all the older workers, but also linked to non-adapted workplaces. Next slide, please. So we've worked for 2 years, well, a year and a half, on an age barometer that has been published last November, in which we try to gather all the inspiring practices that were fighting ageism on the labor market, that were promoting support policies or adapted workplaces for all ages. And so 19, not 19 member states, but we managed to gather good practices from 19 member states. We believe that those are really inspiring practices for what we call sustainable, but mainly quality working lives. And we tried from those practices to highlight some recommendations at EU, at member state, but also at local level from the company level. Next slide, please. And those are a few of the results that I can share with you today. I invite you to have a look on the barometer to dig a bit more on what are the good practices from your country, but also what are the good practices from the others, and what are the recommendations from the whole platform. And I'll try to give you an understanding of what we gather in here. So we divided our research in 3 main topics. So the support to older workers in the company and in the labor markets. The second one is the fight against ageism. And the third one is the adaptation of workplaces. So if we focus on the first one, the support to older workers in the company and in the labor markets, we have actually a lot of recommendations, but the main ones are linked to career management. So we realize that there is not enough, we need more of a lifelong approach, a career-long approach, to ensure that people stay on the labor market and have a quality working life. In the Netherlands, we've heard, well, there is, I think it's an NGO, but anyway, it's an activity that offers training to people from mid-career to learn new skills and start a second career. Those kind of initiatives for us are pretty inspiring, mainly for people from sectors where there is physical, where people do physical work and so need to reinvent themselves from at some point in their life to make sure that they will continue working until late, not having healthy issues linked to their work. So that's the first one. A second one is more linked to the fact of better, improving the management of an aging workforce. So a lot of our members talked a lot about how do we train future managers to deal with an aging workforce, because today a younger manager do not know what it means to age on the labor market and what it means to age at work. And those people need to understand what it means to be able to bring the right measures. Another way to approach that is, well, it comes from Belgium. That was an inspiring practice we spotted, which is linked to a collective agreement that plans that companies over, I think, 20 employees in the private sectors, they have to come up with a strategy linked to aging in the company. And they need to hear all the workers and the measures they want to bring in to make sure that the company will adapt to aging at work and will adapt the workplace and the work program, the way we work, the management at work to aging. So that's one good improvement. Of course, there is lifelong learning and adult education that should be really better improved. And of course, minimum income that goes with adequate pensions and maybe allow the combination between pensions and work to make sure that people continue working. But that does not go without a good pension that ensure that people continue working because they want to and not because they need to, money speaking. Next slide, please. Can you go to the next slide? Yeah, okay. So the next set of measures, or at least good practices we gathered, respond to the fight of age discrimination in employment. So it starts, of course, with recruitment process, and Gülin talked about it earlier, so I won't dig into this. But there is also age discrimination at work with employers, but also with employees. And we spotted good training programs set up in Romania and in Slovenia on the basis of programs linked to sexism at work. I don't know, I mean, I know that in the company I work with and in the previous one, we often had this kind of training for all employees to understand what it means, what is the impact on the person that is victim of discrimination, but also because some people are ageist but do not realize they are until we tell them so. So it is really a win-win to make sure that all employees work together. Another topic we've worked a lot and we will continue working on a lot is age limits to access work and training, because today at EU level we have a directive that is supposedly against all type of discrimination at work, including aging, but aging is the only criteria for which the directive, the EU directive, allowed member states to put a limit, meaning that from a certain age, a member state can decide that there is no point in allowing training or access to this kind of work. And the EU allowed this. So this is something that we are fighting against here at Age. And finally, another point that is super important and which is also one of the focus area we are working on this year is intersectionality, with a specific focus on older women, where here I invite you to have a look on the case of Sweden, which is quite good actually, because they support women along their career, meaning that there is more women now after 50 that are still working and having a good career and a quality career, because they have been supported along their career. And this is something that we push for. When I talk about intersectionality for older women, for instance, it means also ensuring that the specific needs in terms of care is understood. So I'm talking on one side about menopause and how do we support women who have symptoms that are a burden for them while they are still working, because some of them have such symptoms that they have to stop working. Others, they have to stop working because in majority, women are informal carers. And so sometimes it's really hard to deal with supporting care duties for grandchildren, but also older relatives, and continue working. So how do we support those people? Next slide, please. Yeah, and that is the last set of the last big topic we try to cover. There is a lot to cover, so pretty sure we forgot, we couldn't cover everything, and also like we try to be as general as possible, but something that I would like to do a lot is really working sector by sector. And I'm saying this here because it is very true for that part. Workplaces for all ages, it really depends on the sector you're working on. So I'll try here to be as generous as possible, but keep in mind that it is really specific to a sector. So of course there is health and security at work. There is also the part of mental health at work, which is really important. Our members reported programs in municipalities in Finland that are studying the impact of work along the career on the mental health of older workers. And from that, they are trying to develop some good practices and to apply them in other municipalities or sectors, trying to adapt with the different sectors. There is the flexibility of time. I told you about informal carers. We talked here at EU level about the work-life balance directive, which is a lot for parents, also for informal carers, but this is really not enough. So this is another battle we're trying to lead today. And finally, there is the point on digitalization. So it is related, of course, to how to stay updated with the new digital tools at work and make sure that we can continue working with these new digital technologies, but also how digitalization actually can support older workers. Like if I take the example of telework, for some older people, it was really hard to cope with it during COVID pandemic because they are not updated with new technologies. Another side of it was for those who were updated, it was a relief because they didn't have to go to work through the pandemic and they could continue working, staying at home. And for this, I invite you to have a look on the newly launched EU OSHA campaign, of which we are partnering, and for which we hope that we will be able to bring some new recommendation or progress in this area. Next slide, please. And yeah, and that's it. I invite you to have a look on the Barometer, and if you have any question, do not hesitate after the webinar. I hope I was not too long.
Thanks a lot. Long, but not too long. I think it was really interesting. Thanks for the presentation. Any immediate questions, or should we continue? I mean, there's time for immediate question if it's needed. Well, then I would like to continue and hand over to Mike Mansfield from ProAge, and talk about the multi-generational workforce. And Mike, it's your turn.
Great, thank you very much. I will share my.
You're sharing yourself? Or? Yeah.
Can you see my screen now?
Yeah, perfect.
Great. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak today. Maybe picking up initially on some of the points that have been made so far. Sarah mentioned the impact of demographic change on the labour market. And if we look in the UK, where we're based as a charity, we can see that since 1992, that workers over 50 are the fastest growing demographic group of workers in the labour market. They've grown by 4 million people since 1992, compared to a growth of only 2 million for people aged 25 to 49. So the question then arises, what are organizations doing to prepare for a multi-generational workforce, but also for an aging workforce? So ProAge is a charity in the UK, and we are working to help organizations understand and leverage the skills and experience of older workers in the workplace to create more intergenerational and multi-generational workplaces. And we teamed up with another charity, Brave Starts, who help individuals who are mid-career figure out their next step in what they want to do, and looked at the way organizations are preparing for an aging workforce, and wanted to do a survey to understand why more wasn't being done to address the fact that the 50 plus people aged 50 plus are the fastest growing group. Employment opportunities are often closed to them. And in our work, what we wanted to do was we did a survey last summer and had 3 objectives that we were looking to do. We wanted to understand how organizations were preparing for an aging workforce, see where the topic of age inclusion was on their agenda, and see what they have done and what they're preparing to do going forward to embrace a multi-generational workplace. So we conducted a survey and did an online interview with 223 organizations in the UK. And we had a nice representation from organizations, both of different sizes in terms of the number of employees they had, but also different types of organizations. So covering small and medium-sized enterprises, right through to public sector and government type organizations, as well as some nonprofit, and got some nice representation across each of those. One of the first things we asked was to see where how important it was for organizations to prepare for an aging workforce. And here, people who responded to the survey told us that indeed it was very important for them to prepare. So on a score of 0 to 10, where 0 wasn't important, and we gave 10 the score of yikes, I should have been looking at this yesterday. People gave it an importance on average of 7.2. And we did notice that when we looked at the different types of organizations, that the public sector ranked it slightly higher, giving it an 8.3, but that small and medium-sized enterprises said it was a little less important, giving it 6.8. Still, the core message here was that most organizations, regardless of their type, felt that preparing for an aging workforce in the UK was very important. The next question we asked showed a disconnect in terms of how organizations are reacting. We asked organizations how strategically prepared they were for an aging workforce. And here we saw that they weren't prepared. They weren't as prepared. There was a mismatch in terms of the level of importance they saw and their preparation. They give it a 4.3 out of 10. And we saw here that small and medium-sized enterprises and public sectors were slightly, ever so slightly more prepared than other types of organizations, but less prepared were large UK companies and multinational organizations. So this disconnect was very interesting to us in terms of the fact that there was a tension between the fact that they recognized the need for change but needed to do something about it. The next question we asked people was to see what they were doing in terms of looking at employing people over 50 and where their area of focus was. And we saw, regardless, 60% compared to 40% roughly, were more focused on retaining the older workers they had than recruiting people, which says a lot in the UK, where there's a skills shortage similar to that experienced in many other countries across Europe. People wanted to nurture the skills they had rather than to be going out and looking for new skills. Across all types of organizations, we saw that the focus, regardless of type of organization, was on retaining the employees they had rather than recruiting new employees into the organization. So looking back at the fact that we saw companies found that it was important to be looking at recruiting older workers, looking at preparing for an older workforce, but there was a disconnect. We wanted to see where the topic of age inclusion fitted on their agenda. And in the UK, there are 9 protected characteristics on the UK Equality Act 2010. And what we saw was that age came in number 4 after ethnicity, gender, and disability. Now, I think this is a tribute to the work done over many decades to get the topics of gender and ethnicity on the agenda of areas that people working in DE&I are working on and are focused on. And you can see it if you look at career sites on different types of organizations, that you'll often see a lot of conversation around these topics, gender, ethnicity, and disability, but very little on age. Whereas we can see that age is a topic that is that organizations want to focus on in the future, but yet again, matched to the fact that they don't feel strategically prepared, they also don't have it as much on their agenda. What we wanted to do was to understand a little bit more what was happening here. And what we did was we asked organizations who are our respondents why the topic wasn't as much on the agenda. And what they told us was that other areas of diversity were more of a priority for them. It wasn't seen as a problem or a business problem, and that the business case wasn't particularly clear. And I think this is an interesting finding for the fact that we can see that demographic change is happening. It is happening slowly, but happening in almost an irreversible way. So recognizing the fact that our population and our workforce is aging is something we need to address a little more seriously going forward. What we wanted to do was to see what organizations have done in the past and what they are going to be doing, which was the third area of our research, to understand what they have done and how that matches up with good practices. What we saw was, of the 223 organizations that we surveyed, we found that the most common things that people have done to help prepare for an aging workforce was that they were offering more flexible working, offering personal development sessions targeted at career development. And these two, I think, if you look at good business practices and what's required by law, you can see that the actions taken so far really fit into either one of those two categories. In the UK, it's become law that workers have the right to ask for a flexible working from day one of their employment contract. So offering flexible working is definitely a benefit and definitely a motivating factor in work we've done to question older workers in terms of what they would like in looking at future employment. But it isn't necessarily a benefit that is addressing the needs of older workers directly in terms of offering focused retirement advice or planning, which was something targeted at older workers. But yet we see only 65, or just over 30% of our respondents said that they were offering that as a benefit. The good news is that going forward, organizations are taking a much more data-driven approach to making sure in the next 5 years that they're doing the things necessary to help older workers and to make sure that the workplace is more age inclusive. I think it's very encouraging to see, rather than the big gap between what they have done before and in terms of flexible working and the next most common intervention, here the distribution is a lot more consistent, and we can see that the actions taken or that are going to be taken are ones that are going to do two things. If you look at the first measure, which is actively collecting data and monitoring the needs of people over 50, it shows that organizations really want to understand the needs before they start going to develop more policies and procedures. The next one I think is very important in terms of training for managers on being more age-friendly. This, I think, is really going to be very important in terms of setting the culture, and setting the culture where, to the points that Gülin and Sarah made earlier on, where ageism is definitely an issue in the workplace, that hopefully we're going to be moving towards an environment that is a little more age-friendly in the future, and one where older workers will be able to thrive and flourish and have the opportunities to continue working until a time that they see fit and that they want to retire. I think this is going to be a benefit for employees, going to be a benefit for employers in terms of accessing talent and making sure that they have the transfer of knowledge within their organizations that will allow them be innovative and successful in the future. But also good for society, making sure that we give people the opportunity to stay economically active as long in their life as possible. And they're the main findings from the research we had done. What we're doing at the moment is taking the findings from that survey work we did, and we're organizing workshops around the UK to discuss the findings with employers and see what practical interventions we can come up with to attract and retain older workers. And they're generating some very interesting responses. We're going to take the survey findings, the results from the workshops, and write a report that we're going to present to policymakers later on this year as part of our roadmap to mapping the way to a more multi-generational workforce. And hopefully with that, I can stop and we're back on time.
Definitely. Thanks a lot for this presentation. I really like the data and also the questions that come out of this, of course, because for me the discrepancy between the medium high prioritization and the activities planned or anticipated at least. And I wonder then what do they invest for gender ethnicity on the other side, how that would look like if they prioritize this high. But we can discuss this probably later, also in the light of the other presentations. Maybe it would be good to have a link, if you have a report, to have a link at the end to have access.
Certainly, I can share that.
Thanks for now, but we're coming back to this in the discussion, and then we have finally Anna Araskog from Arbetsgivarverket, going back to Sweden. Well, so we started with Swedish register data. Now we are back to Swedish policies from a government employer's perspective.
Well, thank you very
Okay.
much. Yeah, hello, my name is Anna Araskog, and I work at the Swedish Agency for Government Employers. And I'm going to show you an animation over the development of the Swedish population from a government employer's point of view. So, sharing the screen there, hope you all see this. This is Sweden's population. Oops, oh, sorry, I have to just start it again, wait. I waited too long. Do you see it?
No,
Oh, sorry, then I have to go back.
but it worked yesterday when Gülin
Yeah,
said
yeah.
so
It's
the
just
file is not a
because
problem.
I waited too long to start it. Wait a minute. Wait a second here. And there. You see it now? Does it work?
I can see it, but it didn't start.
Yes, good. But then I will start it
Yep.
here. Thank you. Well, this is the Swedish population from quite a long time ago. And on the y-axis, I have the number of people, and on the x-axis, we have age. And 150 years ago, about half of us were at working age, and a large part were children and young, and a very small part were old. And at the beginning of the 20th century, we started having fewer children, and Sweden's demographics change as a proportion of working age people increase. And it reaches its peak in the beginning of the 40s. Here, I'm going to stop there for a little digression. So this means that now 2/3 of the population are in working age, and we will never come back to this ratio unless something really awful happens. And also, if we would like the proportion of elderly in Sweden to be 8% today, the retirement age must be raised to 76 years. And that would, of course, be political suicide. So we have raised it to 67 years. Let's move along. Then the working age group decreases slightly when the small cohorts from the 1930s enter the labor market. But here comes the boomers. And here come their children, boomer group number 2. So there are 2 large groups of able-bodied. And let's make a quick stop here at the turn of the millennium. Now both boomer generations are in the labor market, and their grandchildren, the millennials, they are in high school. Then the inevitable happens, and the boomer group number 1 retire. But this is partly compensated by the immigration. As you can see, this blue area sort of rises. And this is because we, during these years, have had a relatively large influx of working age people who were not born here. So they became blue directly, you can say, and they were never yellow. But immigrants also retire. So the growing of the right side and the shrinking of the left side will continue. And around year 2050, the older group will surpass the younger one. So this is according to the Sweden's forecast. That's where these numbers come from. It might happen earlier. If you see this little dip here, where I point with a mouse, it occurred because surprisingly few children were born in 2022. And then the forecast model assumes that this was just a temporary dip and that we quickly will get back to normal birth rates. But we don't know that. We won't know how many children that were actually born in 2023 until the population forecast is revised, which that's actually going to happen in a couple of weeks in April. So that will be very interesting. I'll come forward to that. But what if this was not a temporary dip, instead a beginning of a trend? Well, then the aging of our population will go much faster. So that's why it's so incredibly important that as many people of working age as possible also actually work. Statistics Sweden's forecast extend all the way to year 2120, but we will stop here just as the millennials have retired and return to the present. So today we are about 6 million, a little bit more, of working age, and of these 5 million are employed. And since we are an employer organization, we must point out that of these 5 million employed, about 400,000 are on sick or parental leave. So about 4.6 million are actually at work. So it is these 4.6 million that we must share in the labor market. The private sector, the municipalities and regions, that's where we have all our schools, hospitals, and elderly care, and the state sector that I represent here today. Can we make the blue area larger? Yes, in theory, of course. And then it's the following 5 groups, roughly. They're retired, people on sick leave, parental leave, unemployed, and students. And there are some other small groups, of course, people during the military service, housewives, people in jail. But as I said before, we have raised the retirement age from 65 to 67. We do have several agreements with the purpose of extending work life, for instance, transition and retraining support, possibility to earn occupational pension higher up in the ages, and flexibility to lower your work time in the end of your work life. And we constantly change the regulation for sick leave, but it is a difficult balance between trying to get people to come back to work without treating sick people really bad. And even if Sweden still probably has the most generous parental leave insurance in the world, we have restricted it a little bit, the same amount of days per child, but you can't use them as freely as you could a couple of years ago. We also have plenty of active unemployment measures, but they change every time we change government, since this is a highly political area. So the only group where the regulation goes in the opposite direction, that is our students, because our universities and higher education programs tend to become longer and longer. When I started, 3 years was a normal time to spend at the university, but now it's often up to 5. And that in combination with an increasing amount of young people spending a year or even more in the military service, it will take longer until our youth become blue. So if we cannot make the blue area larger, well, then we have to make it better. And to make it better, then it's only imagination sets the limits for what can be done. I have here listed the most obvious ones, and the one we work with most. And that is digitization, the systematic work environment, leadership, pay formation. And each of these areas is, of course, worth its own seminar, so we won't do that today. But it's all about competence supply. And where I work, we use the competence supply model Aruba, because it is a fun abbreviation and easy to remember, at least in Swedish. But now I have translated it here so that you all can understand. But now it won't be a Paradise Island anymore. But what do we do when attract and recruit have reached their limits, and all we achieve when we put more resources here is that people change jobs more often, and it spins faster and faster here in the blue area? Well, then we as employees need to think about how we can cool down the system a bit. Then we have to go to develop. And then it's not just about developing the individual employee, but above all, about developing the organization so that it functions better and more efficiently. And very important, to keep and retain those we have attracted, recruited, and developed. Because recruiting takes resources, especially from our managers, who then have less time to develop and streamline their operations. And finally, the somewhat sad phase of liquidating and decommissioning, which we may associate with cutbacks and layoffs, but it can as well be about identifying activities that have played out their role, that can be decommissioned, and thus freeing up resources for what still needs to be done. We all know from being in the workforce for a while that it's very quick to take on new tasks, but it's much harder to actually stop doing something. So paradoxically, to carry out an efficiency worth its name, it usually requires a period of increased resources to develop new methods and ways of working. So we must become better at long-term planning. And by using these type of long-term forecasts that I've showed you here today, well, it won't solve our problems, but it will help us to understand and get a clearer picture of what we must do. And that was all from me. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much for this impressive perspective. Also on the how do you say in English, on the tools that you have to react on the situation, and also on the problems with the tools implicit to them, because it's also costly. It's also not endless availability of these measures, and much of them also targeting the older workers as such. But on the other hand, it's of course the availability of opportunities for them that needs to be targeted. And I think this is, if you look at the data in a broader sense, of course, that is where the problem shows, because we have a third group on the market, not just the employers and the older workers, but those that are out, that are in precarious situations, that do not re-enter the labor market. So this re-employment is an issue, and that's what is hard to target. But let's see. Maybe don't let me talk too much, otherwise I do a co-lecture. And is there any questions or any comments? Any hands on your side? Loriato, was this you? Was this a hand, or was it just a move? So.
I think sometimes you just get the hand on someone, but I'm happy to ask Anna Araskog. It's interesting looking at the data for 1941, and I'm not sure in the Swedish context how it looked, but I'm guessing that women have been coming into the workforce in greater numbers since then.
Yeah, I would say that started, if you're going to look at it that way, that really started during the 70s, later on. So then,
I'm thinking that the demographic dividend, as it were, might look a little bit different if that's included. And 1941 might not look quite so good, because I noticed it seemed to drop from 64 to 59%. It wasn't a big change.
No, I don't really know, but we have had this large group of people that were born in the 40s, and then there was so very few in the 30s. So that made it look like that. And I have no idea how it looked in other countries. That would be very interesting, but that's probably has to do with the war and everything. So it will probably look very different from another country. But in Sweden, we had this huge cohort during the 40s, and then their children during the 60s. But it had nothing to do with women coming in. That has to do with them just being born.
What I'm thinking is, if I had you right, I've been noting it down that in 1941, 64% of the population were of working age, 20 to 65. And that implies that was sort of the best point. And then to drop down to currently around 59%, which wasn't a huge change. And my feeling is that if women have come into the workforce from the 1970s in large numbers, that actually, if you included that in the figures, the demographic dividend might look very different. And it might actually tell a story where things are looking hugely better now than maybe back in 1941 in terms of those demographic ratios.
Oh, yes. If you, unfortunately, we don't have statistics of how many that actually worked in the 40s. We don't know that. This was just, we know that from 1970. So therefore you don't know that. But now I understand what you mean. Of course, if you look at the population that are working, then that would probably be a much larger part in the 70s. Definitely. Yes, that's true.
No, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That may be also an issue for the international comparison, because we can of course compare the quite relatively similar demographic patterns, but the participation in work, also the gender participation in work, not just, but maybe also the differences by educational levels vary quite a lot between the countries, and so does the problem from it. But maybe that's a question to Mike and also to Sarah. From a more international perspective, how does it look like in the UK? Would you have a similar pattern also for the blue areas and a similar assumption about the blue area historically?
I think in the UK, you probably would in terms of the demographic change. And I think when you look at information from the Office for National Statistics and from the OECD, you can see that I think the points Anna was making are played out as well when you look at the dependency ratio in terms of the number of people who are of working age compared to the number of people who are retirement age, that becoming is going the wrong way in terms of the high number of people who are going to be retired compared to in work in the UK and other countries going forward into the 2050, 2070. It'd be interesting to look again at the labour participation of women in the workforce as well. I think it would be similar, though I think maybe in the UK, women may have joined the workforce in larger numbers, I think, during the war, but then dropped out of the workforce again and come back again in the 60s and 70s.
Maybe it's the same with the unemployed, by the way, with relatively high unemployment in Sweden at the moment. Sarah, there's a hand.
Yes, I'd like to make an observation and then ask a question, if I may. And my observation involves the activity on the part of employers with regard to gender, ethnicity, race, and disability. I think one of the reasons that they have been much more active with regard to these groups than to older groups is because those groups, the former groups, have very active vocal constituents demanding change. And you don't have that same sort of involvement on the part of older workers. Yes, you have groups like some of the speakers here today represent, and certainly my former organization was very active, is very active in dealing with older worker issues. But in fact, employers don't feel the pressure to respond to what older workers may want. And I'm not 100% sure that we've actually identified what it is that older workers themselves want and that would, in fact, keep them in the labor force longer. But my question is, I've been involved in this area for 40 plus years, and we have looked repeatedly at the future needs of the workforce and conducted studies on best practices that would entice older workers to remain in the workforce and might encourage employers to respond to what older workers may want. What is it? Is anybody, and I was interested in the research that Mr. Mansfield conducted, because I think he's beginning to get at the answer to my question. What is it that employers, managers, supervisors are saying in response to these best practices? Why have we been reporting for at least 30 years on best practices and moved the needle so little? And what is it that we aren't providing employers that they want or need? Employers are not stupid for the most part, or they don't stay in business. And what is it that we can do to get them to see that perhaps some of these best practices might be what they need, or maybe it isn't what they need? And we've got to come up with some better ideas than we have to date. Also, a second question, if I may, if you can get to it, is Sweden excited the whole world in the 1970s with its phased retirement program. Why hasn't that spread internationally to other employers? We all say, the advocates for older workers, that employers or that older workers want phased retirement, would like to ease into retirement, but they aren't getting it. So what is it that phased retirement is not offering employers that we think it might? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the good question. It was directed to Mike Mansfield. Maybe I don't have an answer.
I think that, Sarah, you bring up lots of really interesting points. On the just tackling them sort of in reverse order, maybe a little bit. Phased retirement is definitely a trend that we see. I hadn't realized it had started in Sweden. But I used to work at an insurance company, and I used to headed up their retirement research program, where we looked at 15 countries around the world and how they were preparing for retirement. One of the findings from that survey was that only a third of workers saw retirement as that cliff edge event where you sort of are working on Friday and from Monday you're retired on. The majority, I think it was 57%, wanted some form of phased retirement. And the reason they wanted it were generally positive reasons. When we looked at the single responses, they were to keep active, keep your brain alert, and a lot around social contact. Collectively, there was a big group of people who wanted to stay working for financial reasons. So I think we can see a shift in terms of older workers reviewing and revisiting the relationship with work and how they want to continue working. I think that is in many cases because we are healthier longer in our life right now, and we can and we want to continue working. The challenge, I think, with employers is, yes, they see the trend in terms of an aging population, and you're absolutely right. People have fought long and hard to get gender, race, and disability on the agenda. I think one element, and I don't want to overplay this element, one element is that when we look at ageism as a topic, I think it's something that we allow ourselves to speak negatively about ourselves in terms of age. And that has an impact in terms of the importance people place on it as a protected characteristic of the way people deal with it in the workplace and how serious they think it is as an issue. And I think that has contributed in some ways to the fact that there are fewer groups, employee resource groups in organizations around the topic of age compared to gender, race, disability, sexual orientation, and so on. I think that the question you raised in terms of why, and I wish I knew the answer. We've been doing this work now for the past two years, and really want to get under the skin of why age inclusion isn't more on the agenda of employers, which was why we did the survey in the first place. The conversations I have with employers, you get a lot of head nodding saying, yes, this is important, but it's stubborn in terms of them not necessarily taking the first step. I think we have to raise awareness about the topic. And I think the first thing we need to do with employers is to make sure that we take them on the journey in a way that feels safe for them to have a conversation so that they don't feel they're going to be held accountable for too much too soon, but that they seem to be collaborative on it. And that's the sweet spot that I really want to try and work on with employers. It's to invite them to the conversation and see collectively, what can we do? What can we learn from each other? How can we make some small steps to raise awareness? Apologies for the long answer.
I look forward to seeing what you come up with.
Maybe just one, sorry, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just about to agree with what Mike said about ageism. Actually, it's mainly because of internalized ageism. I mean, I believe we are all ageist at some point, and we do not realize what it means concretely and what are the impacts. So I think one of the work we have to do here is really trying to change the narrative and to raise awareness on what is the real impact on ageism. We've been working more and more since last year, actually, with employers and group of employers, mainly in France. I have to say it's easier, let's say, because I'm French, to spot those kind of group. But we are really trying to work better with a group of employers who wants to face face what they are not doing right regarding aging at work and what they could change. I see a bit of not change, but let's say awareness raising in some big companies. Another point I wanted to raise is the fact that we need to link it with competitiveness, and this is maybe the hardest part for NGOs, is really getting into the mind of companies and understanding the language and what they are trying to say. And next step, we really want to try to show repeat a study that AARP has done at US level, which is showing how much money in terms of economically speaking, how much countries lose agreeing with age discrimination, leaving age discrimination be in the labor market. How much does it cost to the global economy, but the member state economy? And I think this will speak to countries and to companies to really act on that topic. I think you're muted. Yeah.
I think it's an important aspect also to simply calculate or to show what it costs us to ignore a certain part of the workforce in this. And yeah, I'm curious about the results. I have a hand by Gerd Nagel. Gerd?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody, and hi, Sarah. Good to see you again. So I am also more than 30 years in the field. And the issue of today is, as far as I recall, is employers' behavior and employers' attitudes. And the question is how to influence it. And I think good praxis hasn't done much to convince employers to do something. That's at least my experience. In the study we did around the turn of the century, we found that employers recruit older workers or retain older workers if there are business reasons. They are economically thinking persons, and they are economists. They want to make profit, and they need older workers to make profit. And the question is there a real demand? And what I currently see if you look at the German labor market, you have a labor shortage in many sectors of the economy, and out of a sudden, it becomes interesting for employers to retain older workers, not to recruit them from the labor market. And unemployment rates are not very much touched by this new development, but they try to retain existing older staff members. So we have to look more in the interests. That's my message. More in the interests of employers. What is there really? What do they really want with older workers? And I think it's less a question of ageism or discrimination and things like this. It's much more an economic issue. And we should be more aware of their economic interests. And if we would know the economic interests of employers, I'm sure we could much better shape our policies.
Yeah, this points also to maybe to the differentiality of employers. I mean, and we consider employers as a group, and maybe there's different interests also. And if I look at Gülin's results, that there is employers that recruit regularly older workers, while there is a group which is not participating in this relatively steep line that she presented. Then I wonder what's behind it, and maybe one could learn a little bit about looking at those that recruit and those that are not part of this, so that that avoid recruiting older workers. And maybe there is some structure behind it which goes into exactly in this direction that Gerd described. What is the benefit for them, and what is the rationale behind not recruiting older workers? So you see a little bit also these education gradient, that older workers are recruited where the skills, where the need for skills is relatively low, and maybe this is also a hint to where it goes. Yeah, Mike. Was it you? Also,
I was just going to say one point to what the gentleman just said. We can see, if you look economically at consumer spending patterns, that a lot of consumer spending is concentrated in consumers over 50. And to the business case, I think if companies want to be able to attract and retain consumers in that age demographic where the money is resting, having an age balanced workforce is one of the best ways of understanding that growing consumer market as well, and a good business case for attracting and retaining older workers. I did put in the chat just a study from the AARP that Sarah mentioned, showing that Swedish GDP would increase by 5.6% per capita by 2050 if we employed more workers over 50. So there is some evidence to show that is actually a great study with lots of really good information.
And the question is, what does it cost to do so? So to raise the employment level. But it's an interesting perspective, and thanks also for the second link also in the chat. So you find the AARP link, the AARP study, together with the study by ProAge linked in the chat. Thanks a lot for this, and I hope it will disappear. So just copy these links now before you leave. Do you have any more comments or hands here? So this. Otherwise, I would like to hand over to Gülin, maybe to Gülin Öylü to simply relate it to her research in the final 2.5 sentences or so, maybe more. Depends on you.
Well, thank you, and I think it was really interesting discussion also, starting from that question that I asked whether it's hiring, because when we started, since there is an age discrimination that employers doesn't hire older workers, but after the results we see there are employers hiring older workers, but is it because they are less ages, or is it because, as Gerard said, also Sarah mentioned, is it because there are economic incentives that hire, and they usually hire lower skilled and part-time employed older workers? And that's the question to also consider. Maybe prolonging working lives and incentivizing employers can mean also to more precarious older workers. So also to keep in mind to have this hand in hand, both increase in participation and recruitment, but also the keeping the quality of work secure. Yeah, but also it was really interesting suggestion to show this by Sarah to economic outcome and economic incentives, and I think it would be very great question to ask whether age diversity lead to higher profits for companies. And I was thinking, how can we actually do it also in using the company and workplace variables that we have also. So it's really exciting research area.
Yeah, thanks a lot, and thanks for all the contributions. And in particular, thanks to the 3 guests today. I think we linked all your contact details in the invitation, so hopefully you can contact everybody after the webinar today. If you don't find it, just contact us, contact Liaison, who's in the invitation, definitely in the invitation, because you registered there, and we can share the contact details if you need this. Also, we keep the links and can distribute this later on. Thanks a lot for coming today. We will continue this webinar series probably, but Gülin, this will be in May, I think, the next webinar planned.
Yes, we planned another webinar in late May, but we will circulate the details. Yes.
Yeah, thanks. I hope to meet you again here. Thanks for everybody who contributed. It was great presentations and a lot of things to consider for us, and we'll come back to you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.